I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story like this. You hear about stuff like this happening to other people, right? You read about it, or hear about it at a bar, and it feels like some distant thing. It's not supposed to happen to you. I always thought Laura and I were different. Hell, we'd been together for almost a decade. High school sweethearts, moved in together right after graduation, got married when we were both ready. We were that couple that everyone envied, or at least that's how I thought people saw us. Looking back, I don't even know what I was so sure of. I thought we were perfect for each other. We had our fights, sure, but nothing that felt like it could tear us apart. I trusted her, like really trusted her. It was just one of those things you never question. It never crossed my mind that she'd ever do something to hurt me, not in the way she did. That night, it was supposed to be like any other night. Work had been a disaster, back-to-back meetings, deadlines that felt like they were coming for my neck, the usual grind. I didn't want to think about any of it. All I wanted was to get home, kiss my wife, throw on some sweats, and maybe crack open a beer. Just let the day fade away. But when I opened that door, I knew something was off right away. The house felt cold. The lights were dim. Laura hated that. She always liked everything bright and warm, like she wanted the whole house to feel like a hug. But there, in the living room, it was different. Soft, yellow light coming from a single lamp, and the vanilla scent of a candle filling the air. She only ever did that when she was trying to set a mood. It wasn't the first time, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was just off. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she's planning a surprise, I thought, though I wasn't sure what kind of surprise involved candles and dimmed lights on a Tuesday. But then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. Soft, kind of playful, like when you're in the middle of something funny with someone you're comfortable with. I stood there, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the TV. But as I walked closer, it was clear. It wasn't the TV. The laughter was too real, too close, too familiar. I stopped at the door to the bedroom. I don't know what made me put my hand on the knob. I don't know why I didn't just turn around and walk away. But I didn't. I opened the door, and there they were. Laura was lying there, tangled up in the sheets with some guy I didn't recognize. Her back was arched, her head thrown back, and for a second, I thought I might be imagining it. But no. It was real. There was no way to deny it. She jumped up so fast, scrambling to cover herself, and the guy, he barely managed to pull the sheets up in time, his face looking like he had just seen a ghost. I couldn't even remember his face. I don't think I cared enough to remember. I don't even know how I found my voice. I swear I didn't plan what I said next. It just came out, cold and thick, like I couldn't breathe. "Are you serious?" I heard myself say. My voice sounded so distant, like I wasn't even in the room anymore. Laura stammered, her words spilling out in a way that made me want to scream. "It's not what you think," she started. "Yeah, right. It's not what I think?" I could hear the disbelief in my voice, but at the same time, I felt nothing. Just numb. She kept talking, her voice trembling, telling me it was a mistake. She didn't love him. She didn't know what she was thinking. She kept saying she was sorry, but every word felt like a slap in the face. A lie. I didn't want to hear it. Not then. Not anymore. "I want you gone. Now," I said. My voice was sharp. It felt like I was telling her to leave a damn party, not a marriage. But it didn't feel like a marriage anymore. It felt like a prison. She didn't argue at first, just stood there, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear anything after that. I was done. "Pack your things," I told her. I barely knew who I was at that point. "And get out." She protested a little, her voice sounding more like a child's than an adult's. "Wait, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I couldn't care less. I wasn't listening." Her excuses were pointless. I was just done. She grabbed a bag, said something that didn't even register with me, and left. Just like that. When the door slammed behind her, the house felt like a tomb. Everything was empty. Hollow. Like someone had taken the life out of it. I don't even know how long I sat there after she left. The silence in the house was so thick, I couldn't hear myself think. All I could feel was the rush of heat in my chest, the tightness in my throat, and that damn image of them together. The way he had touched her, the way she had looked at him, like everything we had built together didn't mean a thing. That night, I drank, and drank. Whiskey was my only companion. I didn't want to feel, but I couldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. I saw her, laughing, smiling, with him. I saw her kissing him, touching him in ways she should have only ever done with me. But the worst part wasn't the anger, or the hurt. It was the emptiness. And that's when my mind shifted. Something inside me snapped, and the idea of revenge took root. This wasn't just about what she'd done to me. No, it was bigger than that. It was about making sure he paid too. Jared. That was the name I found later. I didn't know it then, but I'd find out everything about him. It wasn't just about confronting him, it was about watching him burn. The morning after Lara left, I didn't know what to do with myself. The house was so quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a decision. I didn't feel like moving, didn't feel like going to work, didn't feel like doing anything that wasn't related to finding out who the hell this guy was. Jared. That name kept echoing in my mind, bouncing around like a damn bell I couldn't stop hearing. I kept thinking about what happened the night before. The way she looked at him, the way they were so damn comfortable with each other, like there was no secret at all. But more than that, I kept asking myself why. What made her do it? Was it something I missed? Something I failed to give her? I kept going in circles, trying to figure it out, but then it hit me. I couldn't keep thinking about her. I had to focus on the guy. I had to know who he was. But first, I needed a damn drink. I didn't care if it was morning. The pain in my chest felt like I was being torn apart from the inside, and the whiskey numbed that just enough for me to function. Just enough to get my brain to start working again. I sat at the kitchen table, looking around like the place was a stranger to me. Everything felt wrong. The coffee cup I made, half full and cold, sat there, untouched. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't even thirsty. I just needed to figure out what came next. That's when I remembered the cameras. I'd put them in a while ago. Just for security. I didn't tell Lara about them because, well, who tells their wife they don't trust them enough to leave the house without setting up a few hidden cameras? But I had them. She didn't know they were there, so it was the one thing I could use to piece everything together. I rushed to the laptop, my hands shaking as I opened up the security software. The cameras were all hooked up to my iCloud account. Lara never bothered to check, and I never thought I'd actually need them. But here I was. I clicked through the footage, heart pounding in my chest. The first few clips were just normal. Deliveries, the neighbor's dog running across the yard, the usual things. I had the cameras set up outside and inside, covering all the angles. But then there he was. Jared. He pulled up to the house in this sleek, black BMW. Of course he drove a BMW. It screamed money, screamed power. It didn't surprise me one bit. This guy was different from me. I could tell that just by the way he carried himself. He wasn't the kind of guy who worked his ass off 60 hours a week like I did. No, Jared was the kind of guy who had money and knew how to use it. He walked up to the door with that confident stride, like he owned the damn place. And then came the moment that nearly made my stomach turn. I watched them, right there on my doorstep. Lara opened the door, and before they even exchanged a word, they were kissing. Kissing. Right there. On my doorstep. In front of my house like it was nothing. It was like a punch to the gut. I watched it again. And again. I couldn't look away, even though I wanted to. But every time I saw it, it was like another knife twisting deeper. They kissed like they didn't care who saw. Like it was a normal thing for her. This wasn't just some accidental slip-up. It was intentional. Planned. They had been seeing each other for a while. I could tell. And that made everything worse. She didn't just fall into his arms by accident. She chose him. She wanted him. I felt the rage start to boil inside me, but I pushed it back. There was no point in letting it take over yet. I needed to keep my head clear. I needed to make sure I had all the facts before I did something I couldn't undo. I spent hours going through the footage, digging for anything that would tell me more. But that was it. That was the moment. That kiss. Everything after that was a blur of me just staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it all. Then, I remembered her phone. When Laura left, she didn't take everything. She was in such a hurry to get out, she forgot her charger. I spotted it on the kitchen counter, a cheap, generic charger that I always told her to replace but never did. That was the only thing I could use to find her phone. And I knew she wouldn't be careful enough to log out of her accounts. I plugged the charger into the wall, grabbed her phone, and sat down. For a moment, I hesitated. What if I didn't like what I found? What if I was digging up something I wasn't ready to see? But then I remembered the kiss. The way they were so damn comfortable. No, I needed to know everything. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know. Her iCloud was still logged in. Jackpot. I scrolled through her messages first. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop. It wasn't even about the betrayal anymore. It was about understanding it, about getting every piece of the puzzle. And there it was. His name. Jared. Just Jared. No last name. But the messages, the pictures, that's where it all came together. There were photos, casual ones, intimate ones. They were out at a fancy restaurant, laughing. She had her arm around him, her face close to his, like she wasn't just pretending to be happy. She was happy. And the worst one? The one that made me feel like I was choking? It was a picture of her kissing his cheek. A smile on her face. A kiss that wasn't meant for me. I wanted to burn the damn phone, throw it out the window. But instead, I kept scrolling. I kept digging. I had to know everything. And that's when I found it. Jared wasn't some random guy. He was married to a woman named Sophie. I didn't even know what to think at first. I mean, Sophie. She seemed perfect. The kind of perfect that made me sick. Her pictures were all over social media, holding their kids, smiling at the camera, the perfect family. The perfect life. I could already feel my anger rising again, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. It wasn't just about her betraying me. It was about destroying everything he had built. About making him feel the same devastation that I felt. And Sophie? She deserved to know. I wasn't going to let her keep living in that lie. I didn't care if she was a stranger to me. She needed to see what Jared had done. She deserved the truth. The game had changed. Now, it wasn't just about Laura. It was about making Jared pay for everything he had taken from me. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I spent the next few days like a man possessed. I couldn't sit still. Couldn't relax. My mind kept going over everything. What I had seen, what I had learned, what needed to happen next. I had to take control of this situation. I had to make sure it hurt as much for him as it did for me. Jared had no idea what was coming for him. First things first, I needed to meet Sophie. Not to tell her everything right away, but to plant the seeds. I knew how these things worked. Shock, disbelief, followed by denial. No one wants to believe their perfect little world is a lie. I wasn't going to just walk up to her and dump the truth all at once. No, that would be too easy. I needed to be subtle, calculated. Every move had to be precise. I spent hours scrolling through Sophie's social media, looking for anything that could give me an angle. And then I found it. She posted about volunteering at a local charity food drive. It was the perfect opportunity. People always let their guard down at these things, and I could get close without arousing suspicion. I could see how she responded to a friendly face, maybe get her talking. So, I signed up. I wasn't doing this for the cause, though. I didn't care about the food drive. I was there for Sophie, to get a feel for who she was. I wasn't going to walk in and tell her I knew her husband was cheating on her. Hell no. I needed to see how she acted around other people first. I needed to understand her, so I could tear her world apart when the time was right. The day of the event, I could barely sit still. I showed up early, pretending to be eager to help. I grabbed a box of canned goods and started stacking them, trying to act like I was focused on the work. But really, I was watching for her. waiting. Then, there she was. Sophie. In a plain blue t-shirt, helping hand out food to families. She had this bright, sunny smile that made her look so perfect. She looked like the kind of person you couldn't hate, even if you tried. But I wasn't here to hate her. I was here to use her. I had to keep my cool. I wasn't going to blow my cover. I kept my distance at first. I helped where I could, trying to stay out of the way but close enough to observe. Every now and then, I'd catch her glance, and she'd give me a small, polite smile. But I didn't push it. Not yet. Eventually, though, I found my opening. I made my way over to her, offering to help with some of the heavy boxes. She looked at me like she recognized me but couldn't quite place me. It wasn't surprising. She probably didn't know a thing about me, and I was just another volunteer to her. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I'm Matt. I just signed up for the day. You guys do this often?" She smiled again, the kind of smile that was full of light, the kind that made you think her life was perfect. "Yeah, it's a regular thing. We try to make sure no one goes hungry, you know? It's a good way to give back." I nodded, trying to make small talk, but the whole time I was watching her, studying her, how her voice sounded, how she held herself. Sophie seemed genuinely sweet. I could tell she had no idea what was going on. No idea that her perfect life was about to come crashing down. At one point, we both sat down for a break, and I took that opportunity to ask her a few questions. I started off with neutral stuff, asking her about her family, about how she and Jared met. She talked about their perfect little world, with the kind of passion that made me want to rip it apart. She told me all about their vacations, their kids, the way Jared had always been there for her. Her eyes lit up when she talked about him. It made me sick. But I wasn't done yet. I needed more. So, I started planting small seeds. Nothing huge. Just enough to get her thinking. I mentioned how Jared had seemed distant lately. How he was always so busy with work. How sometimes, he would disappear for hours and wouldn't answer texts. "Oh, that's just him being busy," she said with a laugh. "He's always been a workaholic." I nodded, pretending to agree. But I wasn't going to stop there. I kept going, mentioning how he'd been acting a little off. How I'd heard rumors about him spending more time out of the house. Her smile faltered, just for a second, but I noticed. That was all I needed. She didn't know it yet, but I had started planting doubt. The kind of doubt that would eat at her. After that day, I didn't contact her again. I kept my distance, just like I had planned. I didn't want to rush things. I had to let it simmer. Let the seeds I planted take root. But that wasn't the only thing I was doing. I had another card to play. And this one was even better than what I had done so far. I hired a private investigator. I knew I couldn't confront Jared without the right evidence. I couldn't just show up and tell him what I knew. I needed proof. Something irrefutable that would make everything fall apart. So, I paid the investigator. Told him to follow Jared, get pictures, get video. I needed to know everything. For the next few days, I didn't hear anything. But the waiting didn't bother me. I knew what I was doing. And when the investigator called me with the first set of pictures, I knew it was time. Jared and Lara. Laughing. Holding hands. In public. It wasn't just a fling anymore. It was an affair. A full-blown relationship. Now I was ready. Sophie would know soon enough. And Jared? He was about to lose everything. I wasn't in a hurry, though. I'd wait for the perfect moment. But when that moment came, it was going to be a storm. And nothing would be left standing. The days after the food drive were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie, her perfect little family, and how she had no idea her world was about to come crashing down. But I couldn't let myself focus too much on her, not yet. I had to stay patient. I had to make sure everything was set up just right. I knew how this game worked, and I wasn't going to screw it up. The private investigator had been sending me updates, and every time I got another report, my stomach twisted tighter. Jared and Lara were all over each other. Dinner dates. Weekend getaways. Little touches and kisses when they thought no one was watching. It was like they thought they were invisible, untouchable. But they didn't know what I had in store for them. The worst part was how public they were about it. I mean, Jared had a family. Sophie's family. And yet, he wasn't even hiding it. They were flaunting it, like it was something to be proud of. One night, I got a set of pictures that made me lose it. It was Jared and Lara walking out of a restaurant together, laughing, holding hands like they were the only two people in the world. I could see it in the photos, the smug look on his face, the way they were looking at each other. He was so damn sure of himself. So arrogant. And Lara? She had this look in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just lust, it was pride. She was proud of what she'd done. Proud of the fact that she had destroyed everything we'd built together. That thought made my chest tighten. But there was something else, too. Something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about them anymore. It wasn't just about revenge, either. It was about exposure. It was about showing everyone what they really were. Jared, the slick, arrogant businessman who thought he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. And Lara, the woman who said she loved me, who promised me forever, but tossed it all aside for a quick thrill. No, I couldn't just take them down. I had to make sure the world knew exactly who they were. Sophie had to know the truth, but not in a way that would make her feel like she was the victim. No, I wasn't doing this to help her. I was doing this to make sure she understood that her perfect life was a lie. I had to show her how far Jared was willing to go to destroy everything in his path. I thought about everything I'd learned so far. How they'd met, how they'd carried on, how they'd laughed behind my back. Jared wasn't just some random guy. He was a part of that world I didn't belong to. He was wealthy, smooth, the kind of guy who knew how to make people like him. And I could see it now, how he had slowly wormed his way into Lara's life. He'd used everything he could to get what he wanted. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not after everything they'd taken from me. I waited until the weekend, the perfect time to make my move. Sophie had posted on her social media that she was hosting a little family gathering at her house. A casual get-together. I knew this was the moment. If I went to the house, I could confront her, show her the truth, and make sure she understood everything. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to walk in and throw everything at her at once. No, I needed to take my time, slowly breaking down the walls she'd built around herself. I showed up at her place unannounced, as if I was just another guy dropping by to say hello. She was surprised to see me at first, but I made sure to keep the conversation light, friendly. I didn't mention Jared. Not yet. I had to ease into it, make sure I wasn't scaring her away. I wanted her to trust me, to see me as a friend. It wasn't until later in the evening that I dropped the first little hint. We were sitting outside, sipping on some wine, talking about random stuff. I started bringing up Jared, but casually. Just enough to get her thinking. You know, I saw Jared a few weeks ago, I said, keeping my voice calm and relaxed. He seemed like he was going through something. Kind of distant, I guess. Like something was on his mind. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't say much at first. I kept pushing, just a little. I don't know, I guess I figured work was just stressing him out, but I couldn't help but notice he seemed off. Sophie shifted in her seat, her smile faltering. Jared's always been busy, she said, her voice a little too defensive. He's just focused on work, that's all. I let her talk, let her defend him. But deep down I could see it in her eyes, doubt. That was my opening. I didn't drop the bomb right away. No, I wasn't in a rush. But I kept hinting, kept planting more and more doubts. I mentioned how he'd started coming home late, how he'd gotten quieter, how he'd been acting like he was hiding something. She didn't catch on at first, but I could tell it was starting to get to her. It wasn't until later, when the evening was winding down, that I got my real chance. As we were wrapping up, I dropped it. You know, I heard some things about Jared recently. Some stuff that might surprise you. Sophie looked at me, her face showing confusion and a bit of concern. What kind of stuff? I gave her a calm, steady look. I think you should know. I think you deserve to know what's been going on. Her expression shifted to one of concern, her voice faltering as she asked, "What do you mean?" I looked her straight in the eye, my heart pounding in my chest. Jared's been seeing someone else. Someone who's been close to him for a while. Someone he's been with behind your back. Sophie's face went pale. For a moment, she just stared at me, unsure whether to believe it. I could see her mind racing, her heart probably beating faster than mine. I didn't expect her to accept it right away, but the seed had been planted. She didn't know who she was, but she knew exactly who he was. And that was only the beginning. The rest would come soon enough. Jared wasn't just about to lose me, he was about to lose everything. I couldn't sleep that night. Sophie's reaction, her wide-eyed shock, the way her face drained of color, it stayed with me, nagging at me. She didn't know how to respond, not at first. She looked like she wanted to believe me, but couldn't bring herself to. I could almost see her trying to figure out if she was just overreacting, if I was just some guy trying to stir up trouble. But I could tell I had planted the seed. And once you plant that kind of seed, it starts growing whether you want it to or not. I didn't wait for her to call me or message me after that. I didn't need to. She would come to me when she was ready. And sure enough, the next day, I got a message. It was short, simple, but I could tell something had shifted in her. She wanted to meet. I agreed, but I didn't rush things. I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I needed to make sure she understood just how deep Jared's betrayal ran. When we met up at a small cafe a few hours later, she didn't look the same. There was no light in her eyes anymore. Just confusion. Hurt. She was holding it together, but barely. And it felt good, because I knew it meant I was getting through to her. Sophie sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin, looking down at the table. Her voice was low, strained when she spoke. I don't know what to believe right now, Matt. What you told me, it doesn't make sense. Jared's always been so loyal. He's always been there for me and the kids. She looked up at me, searching my face. Are you sure? I mean, this sounds crazy. I get it, I said calmly, my voice steady. It's hard to believe. Hell, I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But Jared's been seeing someone. It's not a one-time thing. He's been lying to you for months. You deserve to know. She looked at me like I was the one betraying her, her eyes full of doubt and pain. I could see it in her face. She wanted to deny it, to think that I was just some bitter guy trying to get back at her husband. But I wasn't backing down. I don't want to destroy your family, Sophie. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you deserve the truth. She didn't say anything for a while. She just sat there, like she was processing what I had said. Finally, after what felt like hours, she looked up at me, her face pale, her voice shaking. I don't know if I can believe this. I can't just confront him without knowing for sure. I understand, I said. But it's not just about what you believe. It's about what's real. You've seen the signs. Don't ignore them just because you don't want to believe it. I could see the tears in her eyes. She was fighting them back, but they were there. And the way she looked at me, there was no doubt in my mind that she was starting to see the truth. I'll show you everything, I told her, my voice firm now. I'll show you what I've seen, what I know. But I won't do it all at once. I don't want to tear your life apart any more than I have to. But you have to know. She looked at me for a long time, her gaze distant, like she was trying to figure out how to move forward. Finally, she nodded. I want to see it. I need to know the truth. That was all I needed to hear. Now it was time to bring everything to the surface. Time to show Sophie exactly who Jared was, and who Lara was. Because she needed to understand that this wasn't just about betrayal in her marriage. This was about exposing the lies, the deceit, the way they had both played everyone for fools. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, text messages, and quiet confrontations. I showed Sophie the evidence, pictures, texts, and the video footage from the private investigator. Each piece of information hit her harder than the last. At first, she just stared at the pictures, like she couldn't comprehend them. Then, she started shaking her head, her lips trembling. This isn't real, she whispered. It can't be. But it was real. It was all too real. I didn't speak. I let the evidence speak for itself. Eventually, the tears came. At first, it was just a few quiet sobs. Then, she was shaking, trying to hide her face in her hands. But I couldn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. Not after everything Jared had done. You don't deserve this, I said, my voice quieter now, almost too soft. You deserve more than this. You deserve better. Sophie wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together, but her whole world was falling apart. I could see it. It wasn't just about Jared anymore. It was about everything she thought she knew, everything she thought was safe. You have to confront him, I said. You need to make him face what he's done. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how. I don't know if I can. But deep down, I could tell that something had shifted in her. It wasn't just about the photos anymore. She was finally seeing Jared for what he was. A liar, a cheater, and someone who didn't give a damn about her or their family. She wasn't stupid. She knew it now. I'll be here when you're ready, I said, standing up to leave. But you have to do it. You have to make him face the truth. Sophie sat there, looking at the evidence in front of her, her eyes empty. She didn't look at me as I left the cafe, but I knew she wouldn't stay quiet much longer. As for Jared, he didn't know it yet, but his life was about to be turned upside down. His lies would catch up to him. And when they did, there wouldn't be any hiding. He was going to pay. I was going to make sure of that. The next few days were like a slow burn. Sophie didn't reach out immediately, and I didn't expect her to. I knew it was too much for her to process in such a short time. She was still trying to reconcile what I had told her with the life she had built. The life that now seemed like a complete lie. But I could feel it, the weight in the air, like something was coming. And I wasn't wrong. I got a message from Sophie 2 days later. It was simple, just a short text. I need to see you. Can you meet me today? I didn't even hesitate. I knew what it meant. She was ready to confront Jared. And when she did, it was going to be the beginning of the end for him. I met her at a small park not far from her house. She was sitting on a bench, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red, but she was holding it together. Just barely. She looked up as I approached, her face tense, like she was bracing herself for something. Matt, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I confronted him. I asked him about everything. And he denied it. He kept saying I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the anger bubbling up beneath the surface. It made me want to punch Jared all over again. How could he sit there and lie to her face? After everything I'd shown her, after everything she knew? But she wasn't done. She had more to say. I showed him the pictures, she continued, her voice wavering now. I showed him everything you sent me. And he didn't even try to explain himself. He just said I was crazy, that I was overreacting. Her voice broke slightly, and I saw her hands tremble. I feel like I'm losing my mind. He's lying. I know he's lying. But I don't know if I can do this. If I can leave him. I felt a knot twist in my stomach, hearing the pain in her voice. I didn't want to feel sorry for her. Not after everything. But I couldn't help it. She didn't deserve this. No one deserved to be treated like that. You don't have to decide everything right now, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Take it one step at a time. You know he's lying. You know what he's done. You don't have to stay with him. I don't know what to do, she said, shaking her head. I've built my whole life with him. The kids, the house, everything. I can't just walk away from that. I looked at her for a long moment. She was torn. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want to give up the life she had with Jared, even if she knew it was all based on lies. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about fear. Fear of change. Fear of the unknown. And that's what made it harder for her to let go. You're not walking away from a family, I said softly. You're walking away from a man who never deserved you in the first place. He doesn't respect you. He doesn't love you the way you deserve to be loved. She looked down, her fingers twisting together in her lap. I could see the tears threatening again, but she held them back. She was strong, but I could tell she was cracking under the weight of it all. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How do I even begin to leave him?" I leaned against the bench, trying to think of the right words to say. "Start with yourself. Don't let him keep you trapped in that lie. You're not stuck with him just because of the past. You have a future too, and you deserve to have a future that's real. Without the lies. Without the betrayal." She wiped her eyes, nodding slowly, but I could see the doubt still hanging there. She wasn't ready to make a decision yet, but she was getting there. I could feel it. She just needed a little more time. "You don't have to face him alone," I said. "I'll be here. I'll help you through it." Sophie looked up at me then, and there was a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't quite gratitude, not yet, but it was trust, and that was all I needed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what to do, but I'm going to figure this out." "I have to." I nodded, standing up. "I know you will." I watched her sit there for a moment longer, her hands folded in her lap, staring off into the distance. I could tell she was thinking, sorting everything out in her head, and I had to respect that. I wasn't going to rush her. But the moment she made her decision, when she finally decided enough was enough, Jared's life was going to implode. That was the thing about people like him. They were so damn sure of themselves, so smug, they didn't see the wrecking ball coming until it was too late. And when it came, it wasn't just going to take down him. It was going to take down Lara too. I wasn't done yet. Later that evening, I went home, but I couldn't settle. The anger was still there, boiling just beneath the surface. I sat in the living room, flicking through the footage again. The security cameras, the shots of Jared and Lara, the way they looked at each other like no one was ever going to catch them. It made me sick. They'd gotten away with it for too long. But not anymore. I was getting closer to the endgame, and I wasn't going to stop until they both paid for what they had done. A week went by, and I could feel the tension in the air. Sophie was still wrestling with what to do, but the more I talked to her, the more I could see the gears turning. I wasn't going to push her, she had to make her own decision, but I knew she was running out of time. And so was I. I'd done everything I could to keep Jared from knowing I was on to him. Every time I saw him, he looked just the same, smug, clueless. He was still walking around, acting like he had everything under control. But I wasn't fooled. He didn't know what was coming. And when the truth hit him, it was going to be worse than anything he could imagine. Sophie reached out to me again a few days later. She was ready. She'd made her decision. Jared wasn't going to get away with this. And it wasn't just about her anymore. She realized she couldn't be with someone who was capable of tearing apart everything they had built, just for his own selfish pleasure. I met her at her house that evening. The air between us was different now. She wasn't that same uncertain woman I'd met a week ago. She was stronger. And when she spoke, her voice was steady, full of resolve. "I'm done," she said simply. "I'm going to tell him. I'm going to tell him everything." I felt a rush of relief. But I didn't want to act like it was over yet. There was still work to do. Still damage to be caused. "Do you want me to be there with you?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment. "No. I think I need to do this alone. But I need you to know I couldn't have gotten here without you. You were the one who made me see the truth." I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest. She wasn't going to let Jared off easy. I knew that now. She was going to make him face the consequences, and I was more than ready to watch it all unfold. I didn't hear from Sophie for hours after she went home, and I didn't want to know what was going on. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about her reclaiming what was hers, even if it meant breaking apart her entire world. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Sophie. Just 2 words, "It's done." I couldn't help the grin that spread across my face. For all the pain I'd been through, seeing Jared's world start to crack open was worth it. It was over for him. The next morning, Sophie called me again. Her voice was shaking, but it wasn't out of fear. It was a mix of anger and something else. Relief, maybe. She'd done it. She had confronted Jared, and when the lies came crashing down, it didn't take long for him to unravel. He didn't even fight it, she said, her voice still tight. He just stood there. I could see it in his eyes. He knew he was caught. He didn't apologize, didn't even try to explain himself. He just stared at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I let out a breath, trying to keep my anger in check. I knew exactly how it felt, being made to feel like you were crazy, like you were the one who'd done something wrong. Did you tell him about everything? I asked, already knowing the answer. I did, she said. I told him everything. I showed him the pictures, the messages, the video. I don't think he ever thought I would find out, Matt. But I did. And now he has to face it. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. But she wasn't done yet. And Laura, she said, her voice quieter now. I'm going to tell her, too. She needs to know what her husband has been doing. I paused, feeling a rush of admiration for her. She was standing up for herself, for her family. She was going to make both of them pay for everything they'd stolen from her. And I wasn't going to stop her. Good, I said. You deserve to have the truth out there. And they deserve to face it. The following weeks felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Jared tried to salvage his marriage, but Sophie wasn't having it. There were a few more confrontations between them, but each time, he looked more defeated, more desperate. Sophie stood her ground, not letting him manipulate her into feeling sorry for him. She was done. And the moment she called it quits, everything fell apart. Jared lost Sophie. And he lost his family. Laura, of course, didn't take it well. I don't think she ever thought she'd be on the other side of the story. When Sophie confronted her with the truth, Lara's first reaction was the same as Jared's, denial. She tried to throw blame around, making excuses, but it didn't matter anymore. Sophie didn't care. She wasn't going to let her off the hook. The facade was cracked. They both paid the price. Jared's life unraveled quickly after that. Sophie filed for divorce. The house was sold. He tried to keep up the image of a successful, charming man, but everyone saw through it. His affair with Laura was no longer a secret. The gossip spread like wildfire. And when his wife finally left him, Jared was left with nothing but the shattered remains of his perfect life. Laura, too, was left with the aftermath. I'm sure she thought she could just slip back into her old life, pretend like nothing happened. But nothing ever goes back to the way it was once the truth comes out. I'm sure people knew what she'd done. And I knew, sooner or later, it would catch up with her. As for me, well, I got what I needed. It wasn't just about watching them suffer. It was about taking my pain and making it mean something. It was about standing up, about taking control when I felt completely powerless. And in the end, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. Sophie, she's better now. Stronger. We don't talk as much anymore, but I know she's doing okay. She's got her kids, her life, and she's moving forward. As for me, I learned a lot from all of this. About myself. About what it means to trust someone. And about how deep betrayal can go. But in the end, I guess I'm better off. I don't need them to be happy anymore. I've got my own life to rebuild. And I'm doing it. One day at a time. And I'll never make the mistake of trusting someone like that again. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.